That would be why. Okay, let's see if that works. Sorry about that, everyone. At least my closed captions were working, so you all knew that I was saying words. And the microphone was picking me up perfectly fine, which is really funny. The microphone was picking me up, but OBS was not using the right microphone. I've got issues with the OBS settings all the time. It's a constant struggle with OBS. I need to actually start making that part of my before stream checklist, is just double check the sources in OBS. All right, so let's see if that'll do something. Make sure that's yeah. Okay, good. 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 Looks like we're good. Looks like we're all ready to go, except that I forgot to um forgot to have the starting soon thing up, but that's okay, as we're starting now. I think everybody figured it out that we were starting soon. Uh, it's that time. So, it's so good to see you all. I'm tired. I'm so tired right now. Really, I just want to take a nap. But it's really good to be here. It's really good to see you all. On the last stream, I started talking about maybe taking some time off because I was so overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And really, after some consideration, really, I'm just at the end of my semester and I'm incredibly stressed, and I have been feeling very overwhelmed for weeks. I've been working day after day after day for weeks at a time. And something else that was interfering was that I hadn't done my schedule. I'm a very by the schedule person. That's how I navigate the world. That's how I function, is by having a calendar and lists and reminders in my phone and all kinds of things that are already planned out in advance. And I haven't done any planning into next year or updated my calendar at all. And so I really was in a mindset where I was work, and I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so on Monday, actually it was a Sunday. On Sunday, I went through my calendar and began filling in stuff for the rest of December and into next year. And I got an idea of what my schedule was going to be like. And really, the next 2 weeks are going to be way easier than all of the weeks previous. And then I get a break, right? So I'm now that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm reminded that I'm just in the depths of just trying to finish up the semester. That's why I was feeling so overwhelmed and like I needed to take some time away from stream for myself. But I really don't think that that's what, once classes are over and I get caught up on my stuff and I get a little bit of time, a little bit of break, then I'll be fine. Yes, that's my plan, is the My Journey into Anarchism. Oh, wait. I have Science and Leftism pulled up. So that must have been one that you posted a while. That's right. After you posted the first few Anarch videos in that one series, you posted that one, My Journey into Anarchism. Is right there. I see it. Good. Yeah. Yeah, we'll do that. Good. That is the plan for today. And I will What's today? Wednesday, 3rd. I still have discussions to do. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm going to have time tomorrow to sit down and work out everything that I want to have worked out for the leftist perfectionism conversation. But maybe. And now that I think about it, I don't need to have all the ideas worked out. I just need to have enough of the overall ideas roughshod, right? I'll do up some kind of outline. I can probably pull hammer out an outline in 15 minutes. So I'll do that later today or tomorrow. Do some kind of outline for the kinds of conversations I'd like to have. And you know me, I like to make the conversations circular. So I'll set things up in a way that we can go around and then come back full circle, and then we'll go around again and then come back full circle, and then right, maybe we'll go back the other direction and try some other stuff out. But that's I think we'll be able to do that, because that's really something that I've been thinking an awful lot about, like so much. Yeah, that aside is not appropriate. Maybe I'll bring that one up on Friday, but it's been on my mind, and it's very real life. Anyway, oh, how are you all doing? How are you hanging in there? This is the beginning of December, so one of the things that I want to mention before we roll right into the video is a reminder for those of you who may have forgotten, or letting people know for those of you who are not aware. December is a very good time for us to be thinking about and focusing on mental health, because this is a really rough time of year for lots of people, for lots of reasons. Some people have emotions that are tied to the changes in weather. So when it gets cold outside and it's snowy and they don't get a chance to go outside and be in nature very often, then that has an effect on people's psychological health. People spend more time with their families over the holidays. If people see their family during Thanksgiving, and then they'll see their family again for Christmas. And this comes with a whole lot of anxiety, especially if your parents are the kind of parents that judge your kind of lifestyle, or if you have a lifestyle that it is not concurrent with your parents' ideas. Hey, Street Cat Love, welcome in. It's great to see you. Hope you're doing well. If my ghost article could tie into any of these without distracting, that's true. I was supposed to look at that yesterday and I didn't get a chance to. I wanted to look over your ghost article again. I'm just taking a second to remember the stuff that's in it so that I can keep an eye out for things that are going to pop up possibly in the video. Or maybe we'll just talk about that after the video. I think that would work out pretty well. Good. Yeah, because I'm not really super stressed, and that's where I am now. Is I still have a whole lot of work to do, so I have a bunch of work that's hanging over my head, but most of that work has to do with essays, and the students who are waiting to hear back from their essays aren't going to get their grades back for another 3 weeks, right? I don't have to report their grades for another 3 weeks. The sooner I have these things graded, the sooner they're not hanging over my head. But at this point, I don't have a lot of time-sensitive stuff to do. I've got some discussion boards that I need to respond to and engage with for the next few days. But that's just a few posts in each of my classes over the next few days, and that's something that I don't have to be super stressed about. I've got plenty of time. Finals for my 16-week class. They are getting a full finals week that begins on the 8th and goes to the 16th. So they get tons of, but yeah, it is the final essay. Yeah. Well, I've only got one essay that I assigned for my class anyway. I've thought about breaking that up. I think that what I'm going to do is, so part of the reason why I'm so overwhelmed has to do with the way that I've designed the course. All of my classes have discussion board prompts every week. That's how I do attendance, is they participate in the discussion board, and if they have participated in the discussion board for the week, then on Monday of the following week, I see that they've participated, and I check them off as being present. And the discussion boards seem to be a very good way to keep the students engaged in the course and with the material. They seem to actually, most of the students seem to like the discussion boards and to take the ideas seriously and to do lots of critical reflection there and to engage with other people's ideas meaningfully there. So it's really working out well. The problem is that for it to work out well, it requires me to be in the discussion boards, commenting on the students' posts and interacting with them every week. So every week I have to find a few students' posts to make comments on, and it's just week after week after week after week, I get this buildup of work that on Monday I do attendance and I do grading for 2 of the classes. Tuesday morning I grade one of the other classes and then teach that class. The next day I grade for my 4th class, and then I spend the rest of that day doing discussion boards. And then the next day I do discussion boards, and all day the next day I do discussion boards. And then it's Monday again. And so I don't get any days off or any breaks throughout the semester. I'm working 7 days a week, every week from the beginning to the end of the semester. And not to mention, with that schedule, right? So at the end of this week, for example, my classes didn't have any discussion boards for their fall break. And that is the only reason why I've been able to get any of the essays read so far at all this semester, is that they didn't have discussion boards on for Thanksgiving week, so I didn't have to engage with those, and I don't have to grade those this week. This week? Yeah, this week. So that gives me a little bit of slack, right at the end of the week. And in the spring semester, that break is right after the midterm. So most of my students haven't even submitted their essays by that time, when I get my little bit of break in the middle of the semester for the spring semester. And then summers don't have any, but they're only 8 weeks. There are 10-week semesters in the summer, but I've never taught a 10-week over the summer. But anyway, so what I'm thinking is, what I might do is for weeks 3, 6, probably 11 would be the next 10 or 11, depends on the semester, would be the next good time to rather than have discussion boards, I would have my students do some kind of short paper, is what I'm thinking, so that they'll have writing assignments throughout the semester that gives me more point of reference to, at the end of the semester when I'm trying to figure out who's been cheating, right? I'll have not only the discussion boards, but I'll have samples of professional writing. That's one of the biggest problems that I run into is, as I've talked about, Turnitin isn't surefire, right? It doesn't do a good job of telling me whether students have used AI or not. It just flags things that meet certain protocol, meet certain criteria, and then I have to go through and then line by line, sentence by sentence, dissect their essay versus their discussion boards to see if there's difference in language and word use, and there usually is, because the way that people speak about their ideas casually and naturally is not the same way that they write academic essays. So there is obviously going to be some language differences and some phrasing differences and different communication styles that are being used. And so I'll have some short papers throughout the semester that give me a good point of reference, or give me a good opportunity to catch people using AI early in the semester when they can get a 0 on a small assignment that's not going to sink them. Because one of the other things that I'm running into now is, right, so let me first admit that I don't think that I handled AI use this semester well at all. I think that I, as an instructor, did a bad job. Last semester, everybody that was suspected, I filed an incident report, and all of them got 0s. I think that maybe 2 or 3 of them I gave the opportunity to rewrite the assignment, but it's only because I had caught them in their rough draft. And so last semester I was really very severe. And this semester, I thought, well, maybe I was a bit too severe last semester. And so I was not severe enough. I was not severe is the right word. I let almost all of the students, in fact, every student that's reached out to me at this point about their using AI, I have allowed to rewrite the assignment. And I'm pretty conflicted about this. On one hand, the goal of the assignment is that the students practice their writing. And if I just give them a 0 because they've used AI, they have whiffed, and I feel like I have whiffed, right? But if I give them the opportunity to rewrite it, then mission accomplished, at least to some degree. But I'm just not sure what if that leniency is detrimental. Maybe discussion boards every other week instead of every week. See, the reason why I wouldn't do that is because the discussion boards are just so good. And I don't have a way to replicate. So, and that's the reason why I specifically said week 3, week 6, and then week 10 or 11 is those weeks are weeks where the discussions are not really very riveting, or they're discussions that are kind of rehashing the same ideas. So, right in as something else. So weeks 3 and 4, those assignments are both really very focused on personhood. One is more about one is more about what it means to have personhood, and one is more about a personal reflection on our responsibility of determining personhood, that those others are worth moral consideration, is something that we should constantly be on our radar. Is this worthy of my moral consideration for everything all of the time? Right. So and both of those assignments can kind of be crammed into one better discussion board, and then I can have a critical thinking question that also does something that's kind of like that. So there's a few of the discussion boards that I already have something like that, or I believe that I can retool the discussion board and still get the main ideas across. But that's just not something that is an every other week thing. So, well, in fact, it's 1, 2, and 3 are kind of essential. I think it's week 4. That's the one that could be a discussion, be a critical thinking question. But it's just so advantageous for the students to see other people's perspective, because that's a very social one. It's about how we are supposed to, not only how we are supposed to organize society, but I asked him a question about utilitarianism, so our week on utilitarianism, and about whether it would be morally permissible to build society in a kind of way that is ends-oriented. And that gets a whole lot of different perspectives, a whole lot of different responses. And then when students see the diversity of responses, that's when I get to step in and start saying, well, this is a rational moral theory, and look how, even though it's supposed to be universal and absolute and standard for everyone, look at how many varied ideas and how varied responses that we get here from, and I get to point to people's posts and their interactions with each other in the classroom. It's just, that's why it's been difficult, is because all of the discussion boards are really good, they're really valuable, and they perform functions for the students that are not easily replicated by just giving them a different kind of short paper assignment, right? The perspectives that they get from others, the exposure, the understanding of because a lot of people assume that right and wrong are things that are universally agreed upon. We live in a society of rules and laws. We know what good is, right? ... And students are often very surprised to find out that there is no standard, or that everybody's just winging it. That there's a lot more relativity which exists in the world that they must contend with. Yes. Do students ever get into the nuance of rule versus act utilitarianism? Yes. That is, so I set up that discussion board in a way on purpose to get students to fall into a trap where they've committed themselves to something which is actually paradoxical to how utilitarianism would understand their response. And all I have to do is say, okay, well, this is a rule perspective that you've taken from an act utilitarian perspective. However, we can flip that completely on its head, and your answer changes. If we reframe it from a act utilitarianism framework to a rule utilitarianism framework, your response, as you framed this, changes. And that's another insightful thing for students to see. that when we're interested in short-term stability, that there's a lot of things that we might be willing to do to achieve short-term stability, and most of those things are not long-term good, right? Counter to that, and most of the long-term strategies that would be good don't have immediate consequences. So there's a great deal of nuance to be had there. Absolutely. But I am also roughly in the camp that act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism are practically the same. Now, there are very important differences. There we go. There are very important differences between the two. But they reduce to the same kind of framework, and they really reduce to the same thing, right? Then that's a common critique of rule utilitarianism, is even if you've established good rules, when you are presented with a moral situation in which you need to apply the rule, you still have to look at the rule and do the moral calculus to weigh out whether implementing the rule is a good idea, or if it will be more valuable to rework your rule. And so you end up in this collapsing back into simple act utilitarianism, even if you have established good rules. Generally, people do get desperate in dire situations, absolutely. And that's one of the things that does get kind of talked about, is the willingness of people to achieve something short term that is quote unquote good, right? And then we have long conversations about good, because the way that I set the question up is right. So I think it's we've talked about it before. Let me go get it up, get the thing exactly. Oh, I can pull up, I've got a document here, and that way I don't have to worry about accidentally showing you all stuff that is student confidential. That doesn't look like this. Oh, this is... There we go. But that doesn't have the thing I'm looking for. Right. According to here it goes. According to utilitarianism, the use and implementation of propaganda for the purpose of maintaining social cohesion is morally permissible. So I tell them to, here's the prompt, I'll pull it up. Oh, there we go. I can't find the thing because I'm not in the right thing. And there should be something here that just says... No? Okay, so add a source. What kind of source is it? I think I have it here. No? Okay, let me try this then. Yeah, okay. Word is... Okay. Ah, I think here it is where it is. Cool. Okay, that'll work. Well, it will. I'll make it work. That's irritating, but okay, whatever. So from a utilitarian perspective, the ends justify the means, but does this mean any means? This discussion board is intended to get you to think about what it means to employ a major moral theory practically, about what the meta-ethics of doing so might look like. Like there needs to be a post exploring the following claim. According to utilitarianism, the use and implementation of propaganda for the purpose of maintaining social cohesion is morally permissible. Let's make this. There we go. There we go. That's more reasonable. That's where that should be in. So the idea is, right, and according to utilitarianism, I don't specify, act, or rule utilitarianism, though they do learn about the distinction in this week's module. So, right, and when it comes to maintaining social cohesion, so one of the things that I think is really very interesting is a lot of students don't really think about this idea at all. This idea of maintaining social cohesion. And they just assume that maintaining social cohesion is a value and it is a good value. Just assume that. And then they build this idea into their framework. But I have probably about 20% of the time students go, well, but what do we mean by maintain social cohesion? Because if we must enforce social cohesion through force or deception, then it's because the society itself is unjust. Like, that's necessarily. If it requires coercion of any kind, right? The use and implementation of propaganda for the purpose of maintaining. If you have to implement propaganda to maintain social cohesion, that tells you a little bit about your society, right? That right, and so that is another question, right? Is promoting the social cohesion of an unjust society good? Right? So we can start asking some real good questions. And this is just such a good one. Let me see. This is the one before it, which this one could really be a critical thinking question. It is 3. Okay, so the assignment has a few goals. To identify the social and cultural influences which have shaped your personal codes of ethics. So this is about identifying one's own biases. And this is one that I expected would really be very helpful and be useful for students to get other people's perspectives. And generally, there's not a whole lot of conversation here. There's actually not that much. And most students just end up agreeing with each other and having the same kinds of ideas. Before I did discussion boards, I did have a critical thinking question that was like this, and when it was a critical thinking question, I seemed to get a wider variety of answers from the students rather than a lot of kind of agreeing posts, which is what I generally get on this week's discussion board. This is another one that I guess I could get away with, right? So I don't know. I'll think about it a little bit more and think about the kinds of things that I can shift around. Yeah, beings who are being. This is one of my favorite ones. Where they talk about what personhood means, who it is and who gets it, what when they get it, what does it mean if people are denied personhood. Um, right. Anyway, anyway, that's all stuff that's on the back burner of my mind that really has actually been quite stressful for me. But considering that I'm about to have some time to really sit and think about this, though the next thing that I'll have to focus on for my college is there is a new federal standard for accessibility online pedagogy. I think one of those words is not right, but there are national standards that have been studied and well agreed upon by the academic community that that we should be building our online education spaces in a way that is as accessible to everyone as possible. So there are a lot of sweeping changes that I'll have to make to my web shells with regards to the colors that I use, the text size and the spacing, and how the information's organized. And apparently I'm not allowed to use tables to organize stuff anymore, and I don't know what I'm gonna do without the ability to organize my stuff in tables so that I can make it look cool and presentable and professional. And but so that's going to be the next big focus for me is getting my web shells up to the minimum recommended federal standards for accessibility, which I think is pretty cool that my college has been very proactive about this. It's something that has been coming down the pipeline for months, actually. I knew about it before the beginning of this semester, and I could have and should have been making changes to my course shells earlier. I just I had other things that I was prioritizing then. I've only got so much time. And now we have a deadline coming up. The college has set a deadline for the middle of next semester. So, you know, I think that again is pretty cool that my college isn't just interested in making stuff accessible, that it's taking that seriously, setting standards and holding professors accountable to those standards to make their courses more accessible to more people. I'm not sure if we should be trusting the federal government at this point for standards. It's not the federal government. I'm sorry if that was the impression that I gave. It's a federal education standard. So there's a federal board of educators whose that it's comprised of a whole bunch of people who work at a whole bunch of universities, and right, so it's a federal board of educators. It has done the research, and they have gotten they've collected a whole bunch of research from other professors who have initiated their own accessibility programs in their own universities. And so it's not just, you know, some arbitrary standards. It's it has included people with vision impairments who have contributed, people who have people who are deaf and have to depend on certain kinds of what are they called? I learned a whole lot about them in one of the meetings that I was in last week, and I can't remember. But there's things that that make certain kinds of visual documents accessible to people who are deaf. It reads the content of the document off in a certain kind of way that, puts it into a text format that, no, that's not, I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's a federal board of educators, not a federal government appointed board. And it's pretty, the standards are pretty good. When I was exposed to it, right, that when I first got the email informing me that I was going to have to redo all of my courses, I was very much not happy with the news, right? And that was the first thing that I thought was, well, we're going to have a bunch of government regulations that don't actually meet any real standards and doesn't make anything better or more accessible for anyone. But the more I got into it, the more I began to do the research and really look into the changes that were being required. They all make sense. That they're all really good ideas, really, well, most of the ones that I understand anyways. I don't know why I can't use tables. That one does bug me. And, you know, I'm not going to nitpick. I'm not going to not do the thing because I don't understand the one thing. But that one doesn't make sense to me. That I can't arrange the content on the page in any way that I would like to. Which is, that's, I believe is what, but I really don't understand that one. Most of the ones with the colors, making things readable, making the images, if you're going to use images, you have to denote whether they're decorative or if it's actually demonstrative of information, and then you have to provide an explanation of what the information is and how that information is useful so that people who can't see the image can still hear the content and get it that way. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's best that this stays separate. Yeah, absolutely. The less government intervention that we have in it, the better, for sure. 100% agree with that. Cool. Well, thank you for keeping me chatting, and letting me get some of that off my chest, because I've really been thinking about some of the school stuff for a while. But now, without further ado, it's time to switch gears over to this. Make sure that goes away. Put that all the way down here. Good. All right, so let's check out Anarch's My Journey to Anarchism. It's longer than I expected. I thought this was going to be kind of a short one, but let's check it out. See what Anarch has to say about this.
Hey everyone, Anarch here, with another installment of Anarch Abridged. This time the topic of the video is going to be why I'm an anarchist, or I guess more appropriately, how I became an anarchist. And in starting a story like that, I have a real tendency to just kind of start with when I was young. And when I was young, I remember always sort of having a doubt of authority figures. I remember getting in trouble at school because I would be sort of like disrespectful to my teachers. And I would come home and my parents would basically tell me that I needed to practice respect for my teachers and for the administrators and so on. And what I would respond is that respect has to be earned. That they don't just deserve respect because they're in the position of authority. That if they don't deserve it, I'm not going to show them respect. And I think the reason why I saw it that way is because it just kind of seemed like so often they didn't really deserve the position of authority that they had. They didn't really deserve the respect of that position of authority. If anything, it almost seemed like they deserved less respect for abusing that position of authority to presume that they deserved respect. That is to say, it was almost that I was frustrated that they were to be given respect for the simple fact that they had that position, that they didn't do anything to earn it, that they didn't embody any values that should deserve respect, but that instead I was just meant to bow down, just be obedient for the sake of obedience. And that was always extremely unappealing to me. But I don't want to say that this means that I was an anarchist for that, or that represents anarchism in its purest form.
Right. That's just the those are the first warning signs, right? And this idea that the people who are in positions of authority don't belong there is something that I think is deeply problematic. And what's the word? Nefarious. It's not. It's prevalent throughout. It's endemic. That's the word I'm looking for. It's endemic of our society. Is that the people who are in the positions of authority clearly don't belong there. And one of the clearest demonstrations, and this is something that Kayamatara has brought up too, is that in their positions of authority, they demand of you, they require of you your respect, and that you listen, and that you acquiesce, and that you, that they demand it. In this way is a dead giveaway that they don't deserve it, because you don't have to demand respect if you are the kind of person that is worthy of respect. You don't have to demand it. Your presence does, right? You don't have to whip people into shape. Welcome in, Matt. It's great to see you. Hope you're doing well today. Respect my authority. Right, but I think that this is for, I would have to agree that recognition that for me, it wasn't just that the people in positions of authority didn't deserve to be there. That a lot of the mechanisms of authority that I was exposed to as a younger person, those mechanisms of authority seemed to me to be illegitimate because of the way that they demonstrated their authority by enforcing, by making, by the stick. And that doesn't demand respect. That's not what authority is. And it would be years, actually. Probably, I probably didn't understand that the failing was a matter of authority until I was halfway through my undergraduate. Right? I knew that there was something there tickling in the back of my brain. I didn't respect authority, and I had a problem with authority and authority figures, but not all authority and authority figures. And I hadn't really quite worked out what that nuance, what that difference was. There were some things, right? I understood that there was a good reason for me to respect medical professionals' authority, or to respect an academic's authority as being knowledgeable on something, but that was pretty much it. All other forms of authority to me seemed like they were just bullshit. It was just this empty structure of order and force without really any kind of good justification, certainly without legitimate placement, and didn't seem to be very efficient. Yeah, expertise versus authority. Right, exactly. And I didn't have the language of an anarchist to make that distinction between those two different kinds of things, right?
But I guess what I'm trying to point out is that, I've always had a sort of skepticism for authority. I remember also just kind of being very young and, for example, really not liking advertisements on television, but also kind of like identifying really early on that what I didn't like about them was that they were fake and that they were trying to essentially trick people into buying products that they didn't need or want. And that kind of bothered me. It felt like that was some sort of abuse of their position of authority, that was sort of abuse of power. But as I went through my teenage years, I was still basically just kind of a boilerplate liberal, you might say. I was coming of age during the time of George W. Bush, after 9/11, during the escalation of the war in Iraq, and so on. And so it felt like sufficiently radical to just be like anti-government, or rather anti-George W. Bush, anti the war in Iraq, and so on. I still had this sort of like work inside the system mentality. I was like generally socially progressive. So, in my mind, it's just the liberals or bust, right? Like there was just no option to be a Republican. I think the most entertainment of sort of Republican ideas I ever had, perhaps because I like grew up in Oklahoma, is just that I thought pro-gun arguments made sense. And that is to say, for a variety of reasons, I thought they made sense. I thought like self-defense arguments made sense. And, I also from a very young age recognized that one of the reasons you'd probably want to have guns is to overthrow a tyrannous government. But, that was sort of this far-flung theoretical more than anything that I actually like entertained really. As we proceed through this, I was not like really dialed into politics until Barack Obama kind of got my attention, but it was really the 2008 financial crisis. And I've always kind of had this like skeptical stance. And I think a part of it came from the fact that, or I should say, I've always had this sort of skeptical stance towards corporations and business entities. And I think a big part of it came from the fact that when I was coming up through liberalism and so on, the dialogue was a lot about like regulation and deregulation. And now I recognize in a historical sense that's because the Republicans were really pushing a deregulationist agenda for many decades that had culminated at the time when I was, paying attention. But I recognized really early on that corporations would abuse whatever leeway that you gave them. If you didn't regulate them, they would abuse that lack of regulations.
Necessarily, too. They're incentivized to do so, but that's not why I stopped it. I wanted to read this message from Kayamatara. Respect requires critique, too. Sycophants cannot respect you because if we can talk about why something fails, we can conceive about how something might succeed. it becomes optimism of endless potential, because if you criticize everything, then through determinate negation, you can start with the possibility of what it could be. Okay. Yeah, okay, I think I agree with that. Capitalist media gaslights us so hard about the cause of the 28 financial crisis because it shines a huge light on the problem of capitalism. Part of why I'm anti-capitalist is because writing my research papers about 2008 for business school. I completely believe that. And I wish that I had been a part of that wave, because I was politically engaged a little bit younger than Anarch, or I mean, I think I'm a little bit older than Anarch too. So I think I was politically engaged earlier, and then when Obama got elected into the presidency, that's when I, having some little basis of political knowledge, I could look back over the past few decades and go, well, things look like they're getting much better, and now we have a black president, so I don't have to worry about politics anymore. And I didn't. I walked away. Obama got elected, and I went, okay, well, everything's fine. And I stopped paying attention to politics for probably another 8 years before I was like, wait a minute, this is starting to get out of hand. And it was because I was reeling from the financial crisis. I was trying to figure out how to salvage my own life in the ashes of the financial crisis. And that's when I started to get political again, and to really say, okay, well, clearly something has gone wrong. What happened? What did I misunderstand? Turns out everything. But yeah. Yeah, and I was also, one of those people. I remember having a conversation with another person in my undergraduate, and that person said the classic line, well, I'm socially progressive, but I'm fiscally conservative, which, I mean, I didn't even understand the statement at the time, but something about that, right? When that student said that to me, something went, wait a minute. Wait, what the fuck does that even mean? My first inclination was, oh, well, that sounds like how I feel about things. And then I started to actually engage with those ideas, and it was like, no, all of this is paradoxical. No, those ideas, no, you can't even separate those things. No, right? And that was probably one of the markers where I heard somebody else say some really shit-lib stuff. And even though I was a shit-lib at the time, the thing that they said was so shit-lib that I was like, wait a minute. That's setting off alarm bells in my head. Something ain't right here. Oh, I was a fucking infant during the crisis, paying attention during the pandemic. Okay. Well, and that's also, I think that was for a lot of people, especially for a lot of younger people that are below my age. That I think that for a lot of those people, the pandemic was right. I think that a lot of people kind of had suspicions that something wasn't right about their culture and society. When we went into the pandemic, all of the things that were wrong about everything were just so out in the open. It's wild to me that we still haven't really come to terms with a lot of those things. Right, with the failings of our systems of distribution, the failings of our ability to disseminate information, failings with the ability for us to disseminate a single cohesive message to the public about public safety, right? There's so many massive failures that aren't just oops. I mean, they are yeah, more than just a little failure, and those things still haven't really been addressed. We haven't made any kind of any changes. Fiscally, they have no idea about macroeconomics. Well, and that's the thing, Matt. I was having a conversation with this person. They were a history major, and I was a sociology major transitioning over to philosophy. So I had a little bit of understanding, enough yet, but they had only a historical understanding of economics. And if you have only a historical understanding of economics without all of the theory and stuff to go with it, and I think the historical materialism, that's, for me, that was the thing that really clued me into the discrepancies, right? I minored in economics, so I took lots of economics classes. And what they teach economics students in the United States is mostly garbage. It's some lies and then some garbage, and then there's just enough functional theory that an economist can graduate and figure out how to maximize GDP and figure out how to maximize profits for a company, and that's pretty much about it. And this, when I was taking my economics classes, I remember looking at the material going, there's something clearly screaming in my face. There's something obviously that I am being misled about. And I just couldn't figure out what it was until the last semester that I was in my undergraduate. I was talking to a person that was from another country. It was somebody from Africa. Somebody that had they were from the Middle East. They had gone to college in Africa, and now they were getting their master's degree here in the United States, or maybe it was a doctorate, I don't remember. But they were telling me about their economics classes and how in their economics classes, their economics professors teach them about the fact that in the United States, they don't teach economics, right? That it's a joke to everybody else around the world that what they teach at universities in the United States is a fucking joke, right? That we are taught a bunch of lies and BS and only just enough of actual functional economics so that we can keep the machine going. But no functional understanding of how the theories came to be, where the theories come from, how those theories are informed, how those theories have evolved over time, because all of those things really, really matter when it comes to understanding economics, right? That's actually half of the whole point of economics is being able to sort through all of the weeds so that you can understand the formulas and the models and what those actually mean, right? If you are just in the formulas, you're not getting the picture at all. You're living in a fantasy world of nothing but frameworks and models, right? You are living in a fantasy detached from material reality. 2008 didn't happen because of borrowers defaulting on mortgages. The mortgages-backed securities were performing the same as they always had. The issue is the stock market lost confidence. They valued the security at zero, which turned every bank that owned the investment was forced, every bank that owned the investment was forced to an upside-down asset to debt ratio overnight on the balance sheet. So they all went bankrupt, yeah. Right. NBC blames 2008 on homeowners that got loans they couldn't afford, when in reality, the stock market's imaginary valuations caused a confidence crisis. Right. That's what the bubble was about. Well, and there's also the whole cooked books part of it too. So a lot of the portfolios, a lot of the real estate, thank you. God, I could not think of the word for some reason. A lot of the real estate portfolios had been handed from company to company to company to company to company, and in these handings off, the evaluations kept being inflated just a little bit, and then being inflated a little bit, but we were getting to the point in our market exchange where transactions are beginning to happen hundreds of thousands of times in an hour, right? That we have so many more transactions and so many more exchanges, and we had people who were just cooking their own books to make their own companies' evaluations better. And this would translate into inflated mortgages and to a whole host of problems. Cookbooks turned out to be paying back a healthy enough. Wait. Cooked books turned out to be playing back a healthy enough. Turns out if people always pay their mortgages first. I don't understand that, what the cooked books turned out. Oh, it's speech to text. That's what's going on. Got it. Turns out people. Okay, cooked books. But yeah. AP economics. Macroeconomics is capitalist propaganda. 100%, Jane. I can't believe I didn't see that message. Yes, 100%. AP macroeconomics is capitalist propaganda in the United States. Again, in other countries, apparently, they actually teach lots of theory and the history of the theory. And yeah, we're about to get back to the video. Thank you, Jane. And that's one of the things on the class that I taught yesterday. I went a little ham. I really ramped up the anti-capitalism a lot more than I intended to, and it was a whole class on class and communism, and the students seemed to like it. So, but why was I bringing that up? Oh, because capitalist propaganda. Right. So in my class, that's where I was going. In my class yesterday, I started going ham on lots of anti-capitalist stuff, and it's I can't remember what it was that triggered it, but somebody started to start to say stuff. They were like, but we need rich people, right? But if we don't have rich people, what's the incentive for people to want to work hard, right? And I started to shut down what I see as obviously not a good defense of capitalism. But then I didn't have to. Other students started to type in the chat, but they were like, but do we really? But Elon Musk is an idiot and doesn't deserve his position. And right, it just all of a sudden the students were like, no, this is all trash and garbage. Everything, no, this is right. Capitalism is bad, actually. But we need rich people, right? Yeah, it's wild that people still want to defend capitalism. Like, what's wrong with you, man? There we go. The cooked books turned out to be paying back a healthy enough. Turns out people always pay their mortgages. Yeah. Yeah, it's time to get back to the video. So I'm getting super distracted. ADHD day, and that's okay.
And there were just plenty of examples that I was aware of, but that kind of like seeded a really important question for me. Why is it that these entities need to be so like strictly regulated? Why is that necessary, right? Like, why is it that the corporation as an entity is so damaging unless it's sort of like held in stasis? And so this led to, I suppose, an early recognition that the corporation was, maybe I hadn't fully come to the recognition, but a sort of dangerous entity, that it had drives which were unhealthy. And so I had developed.
And again, not just drives that are unhealthy. Companies are incentivized in this way. It's and Anarch isn't making a mistake here, but I will say it is a mistake for us to simply blame companies and corporations for doing the things that companies and corporations literally must do in order to survive. Right? That's the reality. Companies and corporations who don't utilize the nefarious tactics that we're talking about here don't survive. They must play by these rules. Right? That's the problem. It's not that, and that's not what Anarch is saying, but I just thought it was a good point, a good opportunity to point that out. The CEO would be fired if the company didn't do shit. Yes. Yeah. The CEO would be fired if they didn't do evil, nefarious, underhanded, exploitative practices. Yes.
Not a truly anti-capitalist perspective, but maybe what you might say is like an anti-corporate perspective. A belief that there needed to be good, stable regulations to keep capitalism running correctly. You know, I had not gotten outside the capitalist framework. I thought that, you know, that's what we're stuck with. And, you know, just like a liberal, I thought, you know, you got to play inside the system and you got to play by the rules and you just regulate the system as much as you can. You got to, you know, keep capitalism on track kind of thing. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. And I recall it feeling sort of like a vindication of my doubts about the corporate system. And I remember it very distinctly. I remember hearing about the crash. I remember coming home from what I was doing and sitting in the car and listening on the radio about them talking about the, Lehman Brothers and so on. And I knew something very important was happening. But I also felt as if, yeah, this is what I would expect. So it led me on a path of questioning what was taking place. Why did that happen? You know, why did the 2008 financial crisis take place like that? And in seeking those answers, I began to become more interested in politics, and I was already sort of like anti-Iraq war and so on. So I had like this sort of like vague constellation of anti-corporate ideas. And this led me to what was actually a very important documentary for me to watch called Inside Job. And if any of you are interested in what happened in the 2008 financial crisis, I highly recommend watching Inside Job. It actually is still an excellent documentary. You know, and it even has this sort of stance as well, this sort of anti-corporate or regulationist stance, you might say. It explains what actually took place in the 2008 financial crisis. But the 2008 financial crisis was highly radicalizing for me. So then comes Occupy Wall Street. And Occupy Wall Street was sort of the first time that I was really encountering radical ideology, you know, truly anti-capitalist ideology. And I was so fired up from, you know, I was angry about what took place in the 2008 financial crisis. I was still upset about the war in Iraq, you know, and I was seeking an outlet. And Occupy Tulsa provided that outlet. I go down to, you know, downtown Tulsa, where the encampment is taking place, and I meet a lot of very important people. At least two of them are people that I am still in contact with to this day. And in that process, I also learned a huge amount. This is the period of time where I'm sort of simultaneously learning about, you know, kind of like the vague roots of anarchism, but more significantly, I'm learning about Marxism. I'm learning about the labor theory of value. I'm learning about alienation, alienation, workers being alienated from production and from one another, and so on. And I begin studying Marx, and I become very interested in Marx and the theory, you know, the things I've mentioned, but more broadly than that, how Marx thought about these things. But I wasn't like really settled into either of these perspectives, either the anarchist or the Marxist perspective. I was sort of just like taking it all in. And I was beginning to develop a sort of like vaguely, or not vaguely, but more specifically anti-capitalist perspective, but I'd still at this point not fully developed my anarchism. I'd not really recognized that the problem was more broad than capitalism. It was more broad than corporations and regulation and so on. So during Occupy, I was studying all of these things and learning, you know, the kind of books I might have been reading at that time were like A People's History of the United States, for example. So I was kind of like listening to Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky and a variety of other people at the time. This was also, might I add, the first time I had ever heard of Bernie Sanders. I remember us discussing Bernie Sanders at the encampment and talking about how like, oh my God, there is actually one good congressman and so on. It was also when I became sort of familiarized with, you know, the corrupting influence of money and politics and all of this. So what happened was after Occupy Wall Street and after Occupy Tulsa, you know, fell apart in about 2012. You know, there's all kinds of stuff in there I would talk about, but, you know, just staying on track. I began to seek even deeper answers. I wanted to understand not only what does it look like, you know, to have a strong analytical framework for how all of this works, but like, what is good organization, and like, in what capacity is revolution actually possible? And in this process, I began to read more anarchist literature and anarchist perspectives. And I began to feel as if they made a lot more sense than what I was reading from people who were calling themselves Marxists, which I think everybody at this point is pretty familiar with my perspective on that. But what I was realizing was that the problem rooted to something deeper than just economics. But nonetheless, I still kind of maintained a I wasn't like an economic reductionist insofar as I didn't think only economics were important or that the economics were the only determining factor, but I thought that it was the thing we had to focus on, right? I thought it was the place where, you know, we would all could be unified on it and we could get the work done on that. But I had not fully rejected working within every hierarchical power structure. So though at about this point I began identifying as like anarcho-syndicalist, I don't think at this point I still had a really solid understanding of anarchist theory, and I was not widely read. I was actually better read in Marxism at this point than I was in anarchism. My only, you know, encounter with
This is very much true for me as well. I think that I might have mentioned this before, that I had always had anarchist leanings and had considered myself to be leaning anarchistically in my teenage years and in my 20s. But I didn't go to college until I was in my late 20s. And I didn't get exposed to real anarchism until my third year of university, when I took an anarchism class from an actual philosophy professor who was teaching anarchy. And it was not exactly what I thought it was gonna be, right? I signed up for the class thinking it was going to be about something I don't even know. I don't know what I thought it was going to be about. But when I got about 2 or 3 weeks in, I started to understand how little I understood anarchism. And so I was very drawn to anarchist theory at that time, but I didn't call myself an anarchist, and I wouldn't call myself an anarchist for years after, because I was engaging more with Marx and Marx's ideas and trying to grapple with the socioeconomic issues. Kind of in the same way, for me though, I really didn't see anarchism as an option for building a better future. I thought that anarchism might be a useful tool for rebelling against the government, which it's not. That's not what anarchism is. It's not about rebelling against the status quo. It's about undermining systems of authority and unjust hierarchies. It's a completely different kind of thing. But I moved further left and further and further and further left, mostly because of Marxism. And it wasn't until I had reached the end of Marxism where I'm still reading and I'm like, where's the answer? Where's the answer? Where is it? Right? And I'm reading Marx, and Marx isn't giving me the answers that I want. And then I went back to it was I don't even know why I did it. But there was this moment where I was frustrated with Marx and Marxism. Actually, it might have been right after I read. No, I don't remember now. But I went back to Malatesta, who I had read in, again, but that second year of university. I went back and read Malatesta, and it was just like, whoo, right? Like this is it, right? But it's not it. This is the right lens, though. And then that's when I was like, wait, maybe I am an anarchist. Thus, you became an anarchist. All right, I'll take that. Anarchist sounds cool. That's a cool title.
The anarchism at that time was Noam Chomsky, and I think most people who are kind of like familiar with anarchist theory will know what that means. You know that it's not a very strong understanding if all you've got is Noam Chomsky, but like over those years, what would ensue? We would get both of the Bernie campaigns. And during these Bernie campaigns, as I said, I'd still not like stepped outside of electoral politics. I'd still not divested myself from this sort of like statist perspective. And I was still, thinking of things in like the framework of like harm reduction, how much can we reduce the damage of this society? How much can we use every tool that's available to us? But I did start to, during this period of time, actually learn more anarchist theory, even though I had not come all the way. I did start to become an avowed revolutionary. And I really had a much more explicitly anti-capitalist understanding. But I still had these delusions about thinking that I could, we could work inside the state, or, we could get lots of social democrats elected and it would be good for us. And that's how we should proceed through this. So the end of that was Bernie's second run. And I think this was a very important experience for me. If you go back and you look at my old Twitter, you can dig up like all these old Twitter posts where I was like so pro Bernie and I was like all in on justice, Democrats and all this stuff. And I think, that's sort of like an artifact of that stage in my development. But then I actually began to kind of read anarchist theory in depth and understand the arguments that were at the foundations. I began to understand what had taken place during the Bernie campaign, what it represented, and also started to research what had taken place in a bunch of social democracies. This was about the time as well that I read a very, very important work in my development. And that was The Bolsheviks and Workers' Control by Maurice Brinton. Around the same time I was reading Alexander Berkman's My Disillusionment in Russia, I believe is what it was called. But, up until this point, I had actually been basically left unity. I thought, capitalism's so powerful, we need to cooperate with one another. And it would have been the sort of person that annoys me enormously, who would have said, we need to cooperate, we need to work together, we need to, develop a line we can all agree on, and so on. But after reading The Bolsheviks and Workers' Control and Alexander Berkman's diaries from when he went to Russia, this was an enormously radicalizing experience. Because what it did was it brought home to me that the problem was hierarchical power structures, and that there was no way you could make hierarchical power structures act other than the way they are structured. They're structured for the purpose of domination and, authoritarianism, monopolization of power. That's what they're inherently built to do. And it doesn't matter how good the ideas are of the people that are inside them. It doesn't matter how good of a political operator you are. The structure itself is not built to do what you want.
This is a realization.
This is
a realization that took me becoming a systemic philosopher to understand that it didn't matter how good the people were, that it didn't matter how great the intentions were, how good the principles were, how good the ends were. None of that would matter if the systems and the mechanisms by which we accomplished the things were the same systems and mechanisms that we had always used. Now, it would be a long time, actually not that long. It would probably be, well, and now that I think about it, it would have been my first or second year as a graduate student of systemic philosophy before I began to make some of these connections, before I began to see, I began to see ideologies as systems of control, as mechanisms of control. And these ideologies were inextricably tied with the mechanisms of recreating society. Now, I didn't have any of the language for this, but I knew that it had to do with the way that we were teaching our children in schools. I knew that it had to do with the way that we were teaching our history. I knew that it had to do with false narratives and these mythologies that we turn into ideologies around which we organize our whole culture and society. I just didn't understand these systemic relationships yet. Nowhere near there. Anarcho-Bernieism. It might be the true way to socialism, Kayamatara, but you know how I feel about socialism. Democratic socialism. There is some nuance to be had for socialism as a stepping stone on the way to the end goal of communism, right? If that's kind of socialism, then yes. But to be honest, I think that anarcho-Bernieism would probably just lead us to more democratic socialism. Scientific socialism is cool AF, absolutely. We'll probably talk about that. I imagine when we deal with the science and leftism, I bet that will come up. So I'm really kind of looking forward to this one. But we're not going to watch both of these videos today. That's just not reasonable.
Also kind of like vaguely about the time that I decided I wanted to start this channel. When I decided to start Anarch, I was, like I said, kind of like, okay, well read, but after starting Anarch was an enormous jump in the amount of theory that I was reading. You know,
So, this is the distinction that is the difference between being an ivory tower academic as opposed to being an actual authority on the subject. That's knowing the theory, being knowledgeable about the things and the authors and the ideas. This doesn't really actually get you there. What it requires is that you put yourself in a position where you are now trying to teach the thing. When you are trying to teach the thing, comprehension isn't enough. When you're trying to teach the thing, you have to be able to live and breathe the thing. You need to be able to exemplify the thing. You need to be able to live through it in a way that you can make it real for who it is that you're trying to teach. When it came to philosophy, the first semester that I was teaching philosophy, I was so underprepared. Just knowing the things wasn't even half of the battle. Just knowing the things wasn't even half. You have to understand so much more. And you have to understand it in I don't know even how to describe it in any better words. Because you think you know something. I've read this, and I've read it a few times. I can recite this thing. I can explain it. I know it, right? That's not the same thing as now that I've been teaching it for a decade. right? That now I know this like the back of my hand, like I was born into this. And it is, that's what the difference is, putting yourself in a position to where you're trying to teach other people. You have to become a completely different kind of authority. You need to understand it more concretely, right? Just comprehension isn't nearly enough. Why my writing for my ghost article changed from my usual style. I made people feel the answer before making my argument. Well, and I would say that's actually very true for that article. I didn't notice it being very distinctly different from your other articles or your other writing style, Kaya Matara. But I did feel like you did a fantastic job of breadcrumbing, something I've talked about authors doing well or poorly. I think that you did a really good job of breadcrumbing, and I always felt like I knew where you were going. When I would begin reading in the new paragraph, I'd be like, yes! That's exactly what I thought we were going to start with. That's exactly where I thought we were going. So I felt that you did a good job of making the answer felt before making your argument. Yes, you always, it has to be applied to material reality. And that's another thing too. When you begin to teach the things, people need explanation beyond just what the words say. And you can rearrange those words all you want to. But unless you can give people a practical example, right, that's what a lot of people need, is that they need to be able to apply it to material reality. And especially when we're talking about ethics, and we're talking about these kinds of theories that do matter to people's everyday lives, it quite tremendously, right? That we spend a lot of time talking about the ideas in the abstract, right? Because none of the philosophy actually takes place here. No comprehension takes place here. And this is something that I didn't understand the whole time I was in my undergraduate, and really I didn't understand after I had gotten my master's. It wasn't until I started teaching that I started to understand how I was supposed to know, if that makes sense, how I was supposed to understand, how, like, just knowing, having the facts memorized wasn't the same as being knowledgeable about the subject. I wasn't knowledgeable about the subject. I knew the names and the theories and how to explain them. I didn't know how to make them materially real because I didn't understand them well enough that I could, off the top of my head, give examples and give hypotheticals that put you in the situation where now you've got to make the decision, right? And when you do that, when you are teaching other people, you can't help but learn a tremendous amount. I think I've mentioned this before, that I learned more from my students about philosophy than I had learned in my entire undergraduate. In the first semester that I was teaching, I learned more philosophy than I learned in my entire undergraduate. And that's just from students being curious about the things that I'm teaching them and asking me questions that I have to go and now look up, that I have to follow up on, that I need to have an answer for that, and I don't, right? So I need to do a bunch of research and find a bunch more authors and a bunch more perspectives and right? I had to immerse myself in the subject so much more deeply, being the mentor. How dare you betray anarchism, Waxing? We're talking about your scholarship, yet you believe in no gods and no masters. Yes, learn by doing, not by thinking. That's a good way. Learn by doing, not by thinking. Yeah, good. 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 Let's get back to the video.
The pressure to get things right, it turns out, is a pretty significant pressure. And so I began to read a lot of theory. I read so much theory in that first like year or so, and I read all over the place. It almost like blurs together. You know, sometimes people will ask me, have you read X? And I'll have a hard time even remembering because I read so much stuff in that like first year or so that I can barely even remember, you know, what did I read in full? What did I skim?
This is one of the things that contributes to my imposter syndrome because I suffer from this. When I get the opportunity to read, when I get some time off, I'll read voraciously. And sometimes I'll read 2 or 3 works at the same time, like actually in tandem. I'll be reading a few chapters out of this book, and then I'll take a break, and then read a few chapters out of this book, and then I'll take a break and read a few chapters, right? Like I read voraciously. And it happens all of the time where I'll start to read something and I'll be like, wait a minute. This seems awfully familiar. I might have read this before. And turns out, yeah, sometimes I'll completely have forgotten I've read something, and I'll be like a third of the way through it and be like, wait a minute. I know how this is going to end.
You know, like all of that. So it can be very difficult. But like I was reading anarchist literature, I was reading Marx, I was reading, you know, authoritarian left literature, I was reading, you know, like Lenin and Mao and Stalin and so on. And I was becoming much more confident that anarchism was the answer as I did so, because anarchism was the only thing that was answering all the questions for me. Anarchism was the only thing that was standing up to complete scrutiny. Everything else would like be right in one place and then wrong in others, and would, you know, have this really bad track record of creating oppressive structures and so on. And I became more and more committed to an anarchist perspective. It became very clear to me as I proceeded through reading all of this that anarchism was the only analytical framework that was able to actually help me understand why everything was happening as it was. And it was the first time that I felt as if I actually was like able to understand what was going to happen. I was able to sort of like predict what the outcome of certain, you know, events was going to be. I was able to look at the large arc of events and see how it was going to tend in a particular direction. I was able to look at politics, and they were actually legible for the first time. I could actually understand what was happening in a way that I had never been able to beforehand.
I want to say that my legibility of politics was opposite, or rather, when I was a liberal and I was engaged in electoral politics, I thought that I really had a very good understanding of electoral politics. When I started to get into anarchism and to understand the world through an anarchist lens, politics didn't make any sense to me. For quite some time, it took me a while to figure out, right? So there were things that people would say that I would get, right? Like, well, you know, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, they're both wings on the same animal. And when you first hear that and you don't have the nuanced understanding, you think to yourself, well, but a bird needs 2 wings to fly, right? And yes, it was still very much a matter of cognitive dissonance. I had one foot in the old world where I was still buying into all of the bullshit ideas, like even where I thought that cops were probably necessary for society, even though I already had one foot over here in the anarchist side, trying to reconcile politics and electoralism and not, being able to see the truth of how things are organized, and then going, but how do we end up with this two-party system in this way? How has history gotten us here? None of this makes any sense, right? So there, for a while, what had previously made a lot of sense to me, once I began to adopt an anarchist framework, this stopped making sense to me. And what I had to do was completely immerse myself and kind of forget about the electoral politics and really get this. And once I really got the anarchism with the Marxism, right? Once I put those things together, when I went back to the realm of politics, right? This is right before I started streaming the first time, so probably 5 or 6 years ago. When I went back to politics, it was obvious to me. It's not two wings on the same animal. What we have is we have one animal with two wings on one side, trying to flap around in circles. That's what we have, right? And I understand the electoralism in a completely different way, that the floundering uselessness of the state is actually the point. Right. Oh, from an anarchist perspective, that makes sense, right?
And that drove me to read more and more and more. And as I kept writing more and more of these essays, I started to, branch out into all kinds of subtopics of anarchism as well. And further, reading just kind of like a broad array of different kinds of literature. I was reading literature from liberals. I was reading authoritarian left literature. I was reading anarchist and generally libertarian socialist literature. And I was starting to, was developing a much, much stronger analytic framework. And this is part of the reason why I encourage people to read theory. There's this weird feeling that people have. It's almost like they express this idea that, it's not really important to read theory. It's just good to understand practice. A theory is just a bunch of books that have this arcane knowledge in it. They're just thick tomes of the words of old white men and so on. And that I don't think is accurate. I mean, obviously it's true that most of them are white men, but I mean to say theory is extremely important. It's going to be very difficult to act in a way that is coherent and effective if you don't have a good theoretical foundation.
Yeah, I think that what I would say to this is something that is similar, but not the same. I believe that leftists can be leftists and do leftist things without having to read theory. I don't think that having read the theory is necessary for being a leftist. It is a good idea, and you should. If you are serious about the leftist things, then what I would say is, number one, direct action. If you are engaged with other people in mechanisms or in avenues of direct action so that you are making people's lives better, or you are undermining systems of oppression, or you are undermining unjust hierarchies, if that's what you are doing, fucking keep doing it. Good job, right? No critiques. However, it would still be a good idea for you to read the theory too, because it does fill out your understanding. It does give you a more robust foundation for understanding why you're doing what you're doing and how you ought to be orienting how you're doing what you're doing. I think that the experience of reading theory is something that cannot be replicated in any kind of video essay or any kind of direct action. The kind of relationship that you build with an author as you are reading through that author's ideas and thoughts is a magical, amazing experience that has a value that is ineffable. But that experience is not necessary for doing the direct action, right? So there's and I'm not really disagreeing with Anarch, right? But I think that my answer is different than Anarch's, even though it's not that different, and it's not in disagreement again with Anarch, just a different answer. I think that that's true. You still need to know the philosophical justifications behind the movement. And that's something that Anarch did mention that I think is also very important, is that there is something to be said about simply understanding the concepts, right? When I first started streaming and I first started teaching people about anarchism and about Marxism, one of the things that I focused on a lot was get rid of the language, get rid of the terminology, get rid of all of the pedantic academic rigor that turns people off to theory. If we can get people to understand the ideas, right, then we can tell them, oh, this is the language. This is what that theory is called. This is who wrote that theory. Right? But if we can get people to get the ideas so that they can see themselves in a relationship with capital, right? That's the idea, is that we can get people to understand their relationship with capital in such a way that they see that relationship as antagonistic and that they ought to do something about that. You don't have to have read Marx to understand that there are antagonistic contradictions going on and that you are in a system of antagonism with that system, in a relationship of antagonism with that system. Just tell them the problem is hierarchical power structures. Well, and that's it's a funny thing. I mean, it is in the same way that what's the meme where you got somebody who's talking about their problems, and it's me, and it's the person that's pouring the massive cup of coffee or a massive bowl of something I can't remember. That's like capitalism is the problem, right? And that's me. And it is, whenever we're talking about problems, capitalism is always the problem. Unjust hierarchies is always the problem. That is always the answer. It's just a matter of figuring out how to get to that answer, because that's always the answer.
And I say this because I acted ineffectively before I had a better theoretical foundation. And that is part of the reason why I now encourage people to read theory so much. I would also like to encourage people to write, to actually write about the things they know about and the things that you know occur in their lives, the things that they are uniquely oriented to have knowledge about. Write about those, because what you'll find is that when you write, you will be forced to take positions, and then you will have to justify those positions and make sure that your arguments make sense. You will also have to analyze your own arguments and so on, right? So what I will say is, when was I an anarchist? That's sort of a hard thing to define, right? It's a fuzzy boundary. I've become more and more of an anarchist over time. the framework makes more and more sense to me the more I understand it and apply it to the world. So here I am now, having read a lot of anarchist literature, a huge amount. And I would say I am most certainly an anarchist at this point. I no longer identify as an anarcho-syndicalist for reasons I could go on about in a different video. But, this is the story of how I got here. This is sort of like the broad strokes of the different events which led me to having this perspective. And at this point, it's very hard for me to imagine that I will ever not be an anarchist. I've read the opposing literature. I've read a large amount of anarchist literature, and I have assessed at this point that anarchists have the answers in a general sense. And I would encourage you all to read more theory as well. I would encourage you to try to find things that are, not only like general overviews of anarchism, but also things that apply to your interests in anarchism. Explore that. And that's also part of the reason why I'm doing the channel, right? Part of the reason I'm doing the channel is to spread this knowledge. I recognize that, education is a big aspect of struggling successfully. So I am trying to bring the knowledge that I have discovered to you all. And I hope you appreciate that. It takes a huge amount of work. I put a large amount of effort into making sure that I get all the details right. And I want you to understand why I am confident in anarchism, why I hold this perspective, and why I think that there should be many, many more anarchists. So that is pretty much an overview. I hope you all enjoyed this and that it kind of like broadly answered your questions. I think I covered all the bases here, all the big parts. If there is a topic that you would like me to cover,
looks like that's it for that video. Is it common that people just pick up theory looking for answers? No, I really don't think that that's common. That people pick up theory looking for answers. I think that some people will. But I suspect, well, as soon as I was about to say it, my brain was like, I fear that we are heading into an era where when people have questions, they will ask AI, they will appeal to ChatGPT, and that is going to be, for lack of a better term, the new religion. That AI will just want to be careful here, because we've used religion on the channel before in very specific ways. And I think that I'm not talking about that thing, that idea. Welcome in, DJ Che. It's great to see you. Thank you for the raid. I really appreciate you bringing your community of people over here. Welcome in, everybody. I'm Waxing Philosophical, and I would like to help you wax philosophically also. If you like talking about anarchy or Marxism or anarchism or communism, I said anarchy twice. I like anarchy a lot. Then give me a follow, because that's what we do over here. That's what we're doing. We're talking about theory. Talking about theory. Ask AI or find an ideology, and that's I'll convey a story. Well, I'll do that first before I get to Kaya Matara's post. I'll count a story. Yesterday, actually, at the end of my class. So the class that I teach is 2 hours and 45 minutes once a week. I almost never use all that time. Usually I'll talk for about, usually I do review for 15 to 20 minutes. The lecture is about an hour, and then there's like another 15 or 20 minutes afterward where I wrap it up, right? I have a particular student that has kept me after class for the entirety of the class period. So usually somewhere between 40 minutes to an hour and a half past the end of class, that this student has kept me in class, asking me questions and getting me to engage with them in these ideas. At first I was kind of encouraged about this. Right, I was like, oh, cool. This is somebody who's interested. They want the information. They want to engage. Cool. What I'm coming to understand is that this student, who is, I believe, 18 or 19 years old, extremely young, after repeatedly, let me give a bit of background for this. After repeatedly showing up to my classes, having clearly not read the material, the student wants me to explain all of the things that were in the reading rather than doing the reading, right? So on a number of occasions, the student has begun to ask questions, and I have said, it seems to me, student, like you didn't read the assignment before class. Well, I didn't have time, or well, it was kind of complicated and I didn't understand it all. That's what you are supposed to be doing, is engaging with those ideas and then coming to me with questions about the ideas that you've engaged with. Not showing up to class so that I can spoon feed you the fucking assignment you were supposed to read before you came to class today, right? That's and the realization that I had last night is that the student is responding to me in the way that the student would respond to ChatGPT, right? They want to know something, so they ask the question, and then I give them a whole bunch of information, and then they react to the thing that I have said. And then I give them a bunch more information, and then they react to the thing that I've said. At no point, and this, I got very frustrated with the student last night and almost lost my temper, because rather than engaging with the things that the words that are coming out of my mouth, the student would ask for an explanation and then begin reacting to my explanation before I'd even finished it, let alone having taken the time to think about it, to contemplate, to process the information. It was just this knee-jerk reaction. Well, I don't get the, well, what about, well, why? Well, what, right? And I was like, stop. You need to learn how to find out this information on your own, because I'm tired of force feeding it to you, right? If you care about this information, which clearly you do, then you need to go out and engage with this information, because you haven't yet. because you're asking me to explain the basics of this thing rather than asking me nuanced questions about your understanding of the thing. You are betraying no understanding of the thing. And so it was, I'll get caught up with chat. So consider the bootmaker. There was once a time that a bootmaker would make the whole boot. But with the advent of the newer and better technology, those skills became fragmented, relegating people to only making individual parts of shoes rather than the entire shoe. This causes people to lose the skill they had once had of making an entire shoe. AI follows the same logic. People are losing their skills because so many of those skills are being relegated to a prompt. That is exactly right. Kayamatara, that is 100% absolutely correct. I completely agree with that. That there's and with the specialization, there is a loss of knowledge, right? When somebody becomes the specialist, right? That represents a loss of all of the other knowledge and information and ideas that go into the rest of the thing, that go into the rest of the project, that go into the whole, right? You are fragmenting the ideas and the concepts and the total of the whole in a way that is, well alienating. Thank you for the shout out, Matt. I really appreciate you shouting out DJ Che. And thank you again, DJ Che, for the raid. I really appreciate you being here and bringing your community here. I'm terrible with shout outs, so thank you for Matt for being on point with that. Yeah, I didn't read the book either, but I wasn't making the professor explain it. I used Spark Notes, and that's exact. Welcome in, Trash Demancer. It's good to see you. Feeling objectified for you. Yeah, right. And that's that is actually, I felt very objectified once it had occurred to me that's the relationship with which the student was viewing me. Right? It was very objectifying and almost disgusting. I am not your AI program to, right? I am a person, by the way, in case you forgot, who have other things to do other than to re-explain to you for the fourth time the thing that you failed to read before you showed up to class today. Right? It was really insulting of my intelligence, insulting of my time, and me as a person, I felt. Get an ebook if you can't read it, or watch a YouTube video. Well, and see, like these are I guess reasonable options, but I don't. But like no. Read it. Read the theory. And after you've read it, if you don't understand it, come to me and I will explain it to you. It is not the case that I want you to start reading and go, well, it's hard, and give up, right? That's because that's the fear. That's where I see us going, us as a society and a culture. And I'm trying not to be too doomer about this. We can move back to me. I'm trying not to have too doomer of a perspective on the fact that I am well aware that right now, this semester and last semester and the semester before that, people are graduating with degrees and are getting jobs in the medical industry, in sciences, in becoming air traffic controllers, becoming programmers for traffic lights, being important parts of how the world functions. And those people don't understand how to do their job, actually. They don't understand how to seek out information, how to verify that information, and to analyze that information critically. Zero comprehension of those skills. They don't know how to deviate from their programming. They don't know how to ask questions about why things are this way, why things are valued this way, why things are prioritized this way. They don't have the capacity to understand how to understand the information. They are receivers who take in the information and can vomit that information back out into a prompt that will turn it into a product that their employer will want, right? Will accept. And this is where our culture and society is going right now. Off of the rails entirely. It is already the case that culture and society is not directed at the behest of any intelligent force who is mindfully directing all of us in a direction that makes sense. It is already not the case. That we are intentionally directed. And now the very few things, facts and logic and reason, all of those things that have kept society on the rails, now all of those things don't matter. You don't need to even know what those things are to be able to get your fucking degree. Oh my God. Yeah, that's true, Matt. Doing the ebook is doing the thing with accommodations. That's fair. Ebook is a good example of an alternative. But video essays, I don't think are. Watching me give a lecture on utilitarianism is not the same thing as reading the theory that utilitarians have written about how to understand the theory. And that's, I actually see this difference. In the regurgitated answers that I get from students, because it is not the case that utilitarianism as a moral theory doesn't care about human rights at all, doesn't care about justice, doesn't care about principles of fairness. It is not the case, right? But when students say those things in their essays or in their answers or in their responses, it's clear to me that they only watched my PowerPoint and they didn't read any of the words of any of the philosophers who were talking about utilitarianism, and that we're coming up with a framework which helps us alongside these other bare minimum requirements that we should care about people's human rights and their autonomy and conceptions of justness in general, right? That these things are supposed to go in tandem. Rather, if you understand utilitarianism as a moral theory that you only care about consequences and justifies any means to get there, then what you understand is not utilitarianism. Right? And that nuance is in the reading. It's in the words of the philosophers who said those things explicitly and explain those things and talk about the importance of keeping those things in mind while we're going through the exercise of doing the moral calculus. The scientific method has become vibes. Absolutely true. Why mess with all that effort? Just good. God in the gaps. Why mess with all that effort? Just God in the gaps, right? Wow. Very easy process. Feel confused. It's God's plan, right? Yeah, trash. Yeah, God is low effort. We've talked about that too. That Christianity, as an ideology, stunts people's ability to think critically or to problem solve. There's no reason for me to be concerned about solving world hunger. World hunger exists on purpose because I believe in a benevolent God, and if this is the best of all possible worlds, then those people must be starving for some good reason. And I don't have to work out how to solve that problem, because it's all part of God's plan. See? Problem solved. Violently unhinged at this moment, yes. And getting worse, I think, Jane. Violently unhinged is really not an understatement. Unfortunately. We live in such cognitive dissonance, it's hard to form reasonable opinions. Actually, Trashnomancer, that is part of the conversation. I think I'm going to try and do this on Friday. We'll see, right? Where I'm finally going to start to talk about leftist perfectionism. I've been teasing it for like a month now. Thank you all for your patience. But there's a lot of relationship there, right, with, right. I'm just teasing more, because I'm not prepared at all to unpack that, but that idea that we live in cognitive dissonance and it's hard to form reasonable opinions. It is part of the problem of leftist perfectionism and how the left ought to or ought to not go about policing themselves. And we'll talk about that in a lot greater detail. Friday, I think, is when we're going to finally do that. Nothing worse than being unreliably dangerous, like a dull knife. Right, actually. Nothing is more dangerous. That's a really good analogy, too. There's nothing that it's unreliably dangerous, like like a dull knife. I think is a really good analogy, a really good comparison there. Oh God, divine command theory is an everlasting thought-stopping cliche. So that student that I was talking to last night, really that's what they believe. But they don't want to admit that. So the issue and the reason why they kept on and we kept the conversation going is they kept trying to reorient personhood in different ways so that it would fit into the moral theories in ways that would justify this student's anti-abortion viewpoint. Right? And this didn't occur to me at the time, unfortunately, but after thinking about it and contemplating on the situation, what it is the student understands that their moral position is not defensible with any of the moral theories that I've given them. And they cannot accept that answer, right? They understand that the moral theories are not giving them the answer that they want. And they are frustrated and they believe that there must be something wrong with how I have explained the moral theories, or there's something wrong with the moral theories themselves, right? And the student is here actually trying to convince me that thousands of years of philosophers who have been writing on the topics of personhood just don't get it. Right? This 18/19-year-old white male is trying to explain to me why all of the decades of experience and all of the thousands and thousands of articles and thousands of arguments that I have read simply haven't considered personhood the right way. Right, and by the right way he meant by presupposing that fetuses have personhood, right? That and he was not going to accept any other response from me other than, you're right, fetuses have personhood. The moral theories all say that. You're absolutely right, student. And they're not going to. I'm not going to say that because the moral theories don't argue that. The moral theories all say that even if, best case scenario, even if a fetus has full personhood and full rights to life, so does the mother. Best case scenario, right? So if we are going to take a personhood lens at all, the mother has it. The mother has it. Has personhood, and we have to determine whether or not or how much the fetus has, right? But doesn't matter. The mother has personhood. That's it. And if you decide you are going to supersede that personhood that already exists there, then you're going to have a good reason. And there aren't any moral theories that are going to support that you ignore the personhood that a person has because somebody else has personhood. No moral theory is going to make that argument. None of them, except for divine command theory. Right? Divine command theory can make that up. Now, it's not true that God ever said anything about abortion being wrong. It's not true that it is against the religion of Christianity to have an abortion. That's, strictly speaking, as an expert theologian, strictly speaking, is simply not true. Period. Now, it is the case that a few hundred years ago, the Catholic Church decided that they were going to change their viewpoint on abortion and have a strong pro-life stance. And then they wavered on it for a few hundred years. And then, like 100 years ago, they finally codified it into something that was formal and standard and in robust, right? Like, but it's still just divine command theory. Yes, the moving goalpost of personhood. The student kept trying to get me to justify why there's a difference between me, a full-grown ass person, and a fetus at the point of conception. Right? No. First off, I've given you a whole bunch of reading assignments that have clearly explained the differences between a person and a fetus at conception. One of those is a pro-life viewpoint. Right? Like, I gave them all of the arguments, and they still wanted me to defend this difference. And there was another student that stayed after with me too, and they were just like, but why? but you know, like the student was like asking the other student, but there are differences between a fetus and a 5-year-old and a 5-year-old and an adult. You know that there are differences. Why are you asking the professor to explain what those differences are to you? You know that there are differences. And I'm like, thank you. Somebody gets it. Somebody. Very good. Was getting me right in the eye. Yeah, cognitive dissonance in action. And it was. And I wish that I had realized in real time that what it was is the student didn't like the answer that they were getting, and so they were going through all this mental gymnastics so that they could arrive at the answer that they wanted, right? Looking back, it should have been more obvious to me at the time that that's what the student was doing. They were grasping at straws because their mental gymnastics couldn't get them to where they wanted to go. But why else would God make it like he did? Did you consider that? Actually, so, and this is the thing. So the student kept saying, well, right, the student flip-flops back and forth. Sometimes they're arguing from their religious perspective, and sometimes they're trying to argue from an atheistic perspective. They're not very good at that. But I engaged with okay, let's imagine that God is real and God ensouls fetuses at some point. When do you think that God would ensoul a fetus? And the student said, well, at conception. And I said, well, then either one of two things is true. Either God would wait to ensoul bodies because God is all-knowing and knows what's going to happen and knows what decisions people are going to make, so is going to know who's going to have an abortion or not. So God chooses when to ensoul a body because God has all the information and can do that. Or it's the case that God does ensoul everybody at conception and has a plan for those people who have been ensouled in a body that will never live. And that's not something that we need to be concerned about anyway, right? This is necessarily the case. If you adopt a metaphysics in which a good, all-knowing, all-powerful God exists, then it doesn't matter whether you have an abortion or not. Period. At all. At all. It cannot be a sin. Because it will be the case that God will choose when to ensoul bodies that will be. Or God ensouls them all and has a plan for souls that don't get to live. In which case, we don't have to give a fuck. Either way. Literally. And the student just could not accept that. Right? This is... I didn't invent this. Right? This is fucking St. Thomas Aquinas. Metaphysics of God. Right? I'm using literally medieval philosophy. Over 2,000 years old philosophy to argue this very basic point that your conceptions of personhood make it wrong for people to do abortion is wrong. That or you don't understand God. Right? That's where we are, kid. You don't understand the God you worship. Anyway. Yet scientifically, a fetus is a parasite, can't survive without the host. what the other student, that was one of the things that the other student brought up. I kind of teased at it a little bit, and then the other student was like, well, actually, technically, biologically, and the other student was like, well, it seems really, really just unprofessional that medical professionals would call a baby a fetus or a parasite. And I'm like, then you need to wake up. That's what medical professionals do. That is literally how they refer to it, for good medical reason, because they understand biology. That's why medical professionals consider a fetus to be a parasite, because that's literally what it is. It will fucking kill the mother. It will kill the mother. And there are situations in which that happens all of the time, where there's a parasitic drain and the fetus robs the mother of the vital nutrients and resources she needs to live, and she dies. That's right. But that's the thing. The kid didn't want to do any research, didn't want to actually do any investigating, didn't want to actually know any facts about the issue. They just want to be right. Right. The student defines personhood as whether he personally defines, whether he personally feels like that person deserves to be human. Yes. And that's, I called him out on it too. So this is a trick I'm going to remember. So I asked the student, after they had been defending this tooth and nail on this hill that they are going to die on. So I asked the student, okay, so what about a situation in which we have somebody who wants to be a mother, and they get in a relationship with somebody that they love, and they get together, and she becomes pregnant, right? And after she finds out that she's pregnant, she also finds out that she has a serious medical condition, and that if she carries the baby to term, there's a 97% chance that she will die. I said, okay, in this hypothetical, should she have an abortion? And the student, or should she have the right? Shouldn't she have the right to abort? And the student was like, no. The fetus isn't going to survive, and it's probably going to kill the mother. And then I was like, it took me a second, and I was like, okay, then you need to rethink your moral position, because that doesn't have anything to do with the personhood of the fetus at all. That has to do only with you interfering with her right to make the decision. Right? So rather than sitting here and arguing with me about what personhood is, you need to reflect on your easy willingness to be the arbiter of other people's moral decisions. And it's so funny, because this is somebody who almost has never been at a loss for words. And immediately they just started stuttering and tripping over, right? They knew that they had messed up, right? Quickening. At the quickening, obviously, when they get slapped. Oh, when they get slapped for the first time. Yeah, quickening is disgusting. Quickening is one of the most nefarious terms ever used with regard to pregnancy and abortion. Quickening is an idea that was invented by doctors as a justification for not performing abortions that women wanted. Right? They invented the quickening, so that at any point that a doctor didn't want to do an abortion, they could just put their hand on the stomach and go, oh, I felt the kick. Oh, I felt the heartbeat. Oh, you have a special glow about you today. That must mean that right, whatever, dumb shit. Either every woman in history is a murderer because they all have periods, or he is full of shit. Yeah, I think it's the second one. Yes, yes. And I think it's the second one. Yes. Craftsman answer. I don't understand how a person could sin if God had a plan. Seems like those are God's sins in that case. Yes, and that would be my point. It either we have a all-knowing, all-good, all-powerful God who chooses at which point a soul is a good fit for the body that will be, or ensouls them all and has their own plan that we're not privy to, right? It's necessarily either one of those cases. And that's something else too. So in the real world, morality is not a binary anyways, right? But that's the neat feature of formalizing a framework in which we have an all-perfect, all-knowing, all-powerful God, right? Because in this framework, morality is good or bad. It is a strict binary. You are doing God's will or you're not, right? And so it really does break down that way, that it must be the case that God has a plan for it, or it's God's sin. Or we can't be held accountable for it because we can't have knowledge about it. Those are the concrete truths that we can know about morality in a world in which we presuppose there is a all-knowing, all-perfect, all-powerful God. We do get binaries, and those binaries, when it comes to abortion, all of those binaries point to it's not something we can be morally culpable for. Period. Well, I can push back on that. The free will argument is just silly. If God had a plan, no way he would get it done if he gave out free will. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I believe that there is some room for an all-knowing, all-perfect, all-powerful God in a world in which we all get free will. The fucked up part about it is, in this framework in which this kind of thing is possible, the God that holds us guilty for situations that we didn't put ourselves in is a shitty God that's not worthy of worship. This is James Rachel's argument against the existence of God. Is not that God doesn't exist, but if God exists as Christians suppose that he does, that is a God not worthy of worship. Because that God has put us in situations that were literally beyond our control and has orchestrated those situations in ways which we are going to act predictably, and is holding us accountable for our predictable actions rather than holding us accountable for any real choice that we've made, right? So that's James Rachel's argument against the a God worthy of worship. Could you explain that, Kayamatara? I'm not sure. I was talking about fetuses. Oh, fetuses is parasite. Yes, actually, I do. Okay, that makes sense. I completely agree with that. Assume that a fetus is a parasite, right? And this goes back to the little girl sitting on the beach who crushes the louse, that is literally a parasite that is part of her ecology, right? So yeah, that fits really perfectly, and does a really good job of helping us transcend the anthropocentric way in which we view our relation. Really is quite perfect, yeah. And that's the other thing. God's plan, he needs her to struggle through the choice. And that's the issue, right? That it comes down to. Christians argue something about the best of all possible worlds, and this all being a trial, and the reason why things are hard, and that there's suffering, and that some people starve, and some people are homeless, and the reason why some people get raped is all part of God's plan, right? And that's the whole thing is just something I can't take anyway, right? It's not necessary for me to eat shit on a daily basis for me to appreciate the taste of honey, right? And that's kind of the argument that you're trying to sell me, is that God is really trying to get me to appreciate the honey in life by feeding me shit all day every day. That doesn't sound like a good God that I am interested in worshiping. Hard pass, actually. I'll accept the reality in which we are responsible agents for our actions, and that we are responsible for making a just world. That's the framework that I'll adopt, is that people need to be responsible for solving our own problems. That's... Call me old-fashioned or whatever, but old-fashioned isn't before the advent of Christianity. Yeah, right. This guy isn't misogynistic or sexist. This guy is a patriarch, right? Is the embodiment of patriarchy, and that's kind of what I was calling him out for. Does a fetus get a murder charge if it survives killing mom? That's another good pushback, right? If we are assigning fetal personhood, that means that fetus also gets all of the responsibilities and duties that come along with being a person. Not just the rights and protections, also the responsibilities and duties. And therefore ought to be held responsible, right? Right? We can't consider the fetus innocent if it is literally a threat to the life of the mother, right? Right? Or we can consider it innocent if we don't give it personhood, right? If we consider it as a living being worthy of moral consideration, which it is. And let me be clear, this is the way that I teach abortion. Is first off, we spend the first half of the class talking about the personhood arguments and the difficulties and all of the controversy and the fact that nobody seems to be able to agree on what personhood is, when it begins, who gets it, and who doesn't, right? These are very important thresholds that are all very much up in the air. So instead, and this is the way that I teach it, is through Marianne Warren and Don Marquise, right? Marianne Warren gives us a social conception of personhood that has reasonable criteria that social creatures can understand and should be able to agree to, quite honestly, right? But if you don't like that, then we've got Don Marquise, who talks about personhood, but says because it's so controversial, maybe we should appeal to this other kind of a moral idea. And Don Marquise uses future projects, which are the wrong-making feature, which makes it wrong for someone to kill you. The reason why murder is wrong is not because you have personhood. The reason why murder is wrong is because you are a being which has future projects which you value, and you have every right to value those future projects, and nobody has the right to deprive you of those future projects and future values which you value, right? And this is a good argument because the fetus does have those. And it is a wrong-making feature for just killing the fetus. It's a very strong, very powerful moral argument in defense of not murdering fetuses, right? That also doesn't have anything to do with instances in which there are threats to the life of the mother, or instances of rape, or instances of incest, which Don Marquis is very clear he's not addressing those kinds of situations. He is only talking about situations in which there is a perfectly healthy, viable fetus, and somebody decides that their future projects are not as important as my future projects, right? This is a moral argument that has moral weight, and that we can get around and have meaningful conversations about, right? I gave this to them, right? Why was I talking about that? Oh, the patriarchy. Right. I have given them a series of alternatives for arguing for their moral position. But instead, the student doubled down and kept insisting that because a fetus has personhood, it means that she doesn't have the right to autonomy. And I was like, but that's just not the case. If you want to argue that you value one more than the other, that's fine. But no moral framework is just going to give you that answer. Period. Yeah, Christians really do like blaming the victims. That's absolutely true. One needs to tack endless errata to a rule. It's probably a bad rule. Yeah, probably a bad rule. How a God with no free will has no play in the game if it makes a move. Well, God doesn't have free will. If I wasn't clear about setting that up, we get free will. God doesn't. In a world in which free will exists, in a world in which God exists and has given us free will, God does not have free will. Most metaphysics, metaphysicists all argue that God doesn't have a choice. That his perfect nature locks God into decisions that are made by the situation, by what is perfect. God doesn't choose to do anything, ever, under any circumstance. God does what is best. But let me finish reading the rest of the... God with no free will has no play in the game. If it makes a move, it has tipped the board regarding free will. I don't really do the free will regardless of framing. The God one just makes it strange to me. Right. You're adding an element that makes the whole idea of free will completely incoherent at that point. Yes, fair enough. I said earlier that I believe that you should have the right to violent self-defense, so it wouldn't matter if the fetus is a person. Yes. And that's the way that I end my lecture, and this is the reason why the student was so irritated, I think, or agitated, whatever. Anyways, because the abortion conversation was 2 weeks ago. That was week 14. Yesterday was week 16, right? So 2 weeks ago, we talked about abortion. And the way that I end the lecture on abortion is by telling my students that I think that arguments for or against abortion, which revolve around abortion, are a complete waste of time. Because what you end up with is situations like with utilitarianism, right? If we don't care about personhood, then we're weighing ends, right? And that could go either way. If we are weighing personhood, the mother has it. And there's no utilitarian argument which is going to give the fetus more rights to exist than the person who already exists. Right? In a deontological system, either the fetus has personhood, in which case we have a perfect duty to life and a perfect duty to autonomy, and those perfect duties are intractable, which means that the moral theory doesn't give us an answer. Or the mother has a right to life, and the mother has a right, and the fetus has a right. The mother has a right to autonomy, and the fetus has a right to autonomy, and yet again, we find ourselves with two perfect duties that perfectly conflict, and we don't get any answers. So if you want to argue about personhood, you can't use deontology because it's going to always side on the mother. And you can't use deontology because it is always going to end up being an intractable perfect duty between two perfect duties that we have a perfect duty to, neither of which takes precedence. So I think that it's a waste of time to use a personhood argument when we have these other alternatives which give us useful mechanisms for having meaningful conversations about whether abortion is morally permissible or not, which don't revolve around this nebulous idea of personhood, which nobody can iron out. Right? So stop doing that. Right? And the student just would not accept it. Just believed that I was trying to dehumanize fetuses or whatever, I guess, and wanted to argue with me about it. Oh, but yeah, that's the woman has a right. The woman has all the rights, all of them. And if the fetus has some rights, that's cool. I'm not going to argue the fetus doesn't have any claims to life or autonomy or whatever. Full personhood, maybe personhood. Capitalist atheists are not much help, are not much different to Christians, as they both worship ghosts. Capitalist atheists are not much different Christians. Yeah, I would say that that's true. Systemically true with the God is dead, the market killed it. They already have a hammer in their hand. Why would they pick up a scalpel just because you offer them one? That's an interesting analogy, Crashnomancer. It took me a minute to get it too. The first time I read it, I was like, what? But what you're talking about is I've talked about this before. Somebody can't learn something new if they have the knowledge. And this is the problem with Christians in general, is that they have been given a bunch of knowledge that tells them not to think about anything else. So when you are in the real world and you give them knowledge, it's like you're trying to hand them a tool and they're like, oh, I've already got a tool. This is it. This is what I'm using for all the things. Right. That really is an analogy that tracks quite well, I think. Good. Hey, we just hit the 3-hour mark, which is kind of good because I would like to go to the bathroom and get some food and maybe chill out a little bit. I'm not going to do any more schoolwork today, but I will probably call it um and give myself a little bit of free time to decompress. Which is this week has been better. I probably and yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should ask you all, do I seem better today than I was last week? Last week I was not doing okay. I feel like I was kind of on thin ice. So far as my mental health, maybe. And when I say that too, I don't mean to be too dramatic about it. I'm not the kind of person that I'm a danger to myself, or that I have problems with intrusive thoughts that I can't get back on top of. That's generally not the kind of thing that I mean. So like, I haven't worked out in 3 weeks. Usually I work out Mondays and Wednesdays every week, and I have been for months, been consistently keeping this regimen. And 2 weeks ago, I just skipped Monday, and then I was really busy on Wednesday with all of the but that's getting better, right? This week is already much better than last week was. Next week will be even better, I suspect. Good. Being passionate this week. Yeah, and it would be hard pressed to call it full depression, but I think it got really close. To be honest, I think that I was really pretty close to depression. Now I'm gonna look back and be like, oh no, I was actually depressed, right? A little bit of perspective is gonna change my viewpoint on that. So we'll see where that goes, huh? That sounds obscure without my article explaining my stance to most people. Well, I guess that might be true too. And for those of you who have not yet read Kaya Matara's article, here I've got the link for it because I've got it pulled up. The ghosts are real. You're holding one in your hand. Go read it. It's really good. It's short. It's one of Kaya Matara's shortest articles, I think. Maybe not. Maybe I just read through it quickly. But it's fantastic. And we'll spend some time talking about it on stream. Kaya Matara. I know I keep kicking that can down the road, but not much longer. We'll probably address that on Friday. That'll tie in with my other themes anyway. Oh, and I was supposed to be doing the thing where I was finding, I found a raid target. I just didn't click the button. Click the button, click the button. Click the button, click the button. Good. Alright, we're gonna go see our comrade and friend, the Noisy Immigrant, who is noisy and a comrade, and just a fantastic place to be, really. They do a great job of covering content and doing so responsibly, but also in an entertaining way. So let's go check out the Noisy Immigrant, give them some love. And thank yous. Thank you, Jane, for being here first thing and for helping me remember to do all the things. I always, as always, I super appreciate you helping me with those, and I appreciate you being here and being part of the conversations. Kaya Matara was right behind them. Street Cat Love came in and hung out for a little bit. Matt, thank you again for shouting out to DJ Che, who raided in. Thank you, DJ Che, for the raid. It was good to see you as always. It's a pleasure. Thank you for bringing your community by to hang out. Doesn't look like I missed anybody. Good. You are awesome. And just thank you. I was gonna say more about mental health because